Talk to me.
You ain't shit.
Ooh, facts.
And you a liar.
That depends on the circumstances.
And you toxic.
Facts again.
The 911 call that changed everything. The voice on the other end of the 911 line was small, terrified, and heartbreaking. A child, barely old enough to understand what he was witnessing, whispered into the phone, "My mommy has been shot." Just hours before, 26-year-old India Kinamore had gone to bed clutching her hospital bag, ready for the most important day of her life. March 4th, 2023 was supposed to be the day she met her daughter, the day she'd been induced to give birth after months of careful preparation. Instead, it became the day she died. What kind of monster targets a woman on the very day she's supposed to give birth? What kind of person looks at a pregnant woman hours away from becoming a mother and decides that she needs to die? The answers to these questions would reveal a level of premeditation so chilling, so methodically planned, that even seasoned investigators would be left shaken. Because the person who orchestrated India's murder wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. It was someone she trusted, someone who claimed to love her, someone who was supposed to be celebrating the birth of their child. Welcome to Crime Chronicle. Hit the subscribe button as we continue. This is the story of India Kinamore, and a man who requested bereavement leave from work before he even committed the crime. India Kinamore wasn't just a statistic. She wasn't just another headline. She was a devoted mother to her young son, a daughter who called her Mother Terry every single day, and a woman who had spent months carefully preparing for the arrival of her baby girl. In the weeks leading up to March 4th, India's world revolved around the nursery she'd painted a soft yellow. She'd hung tiny clothes in the closet, assembled the crib with meticulous care, and practiced installing the car seat over and over again until she could do it perfectly. Her phone was filled with videos of her son playing soccer, ultrasound images of the baby she couldn't wait to hold, and text messages to friends about how excited she was to finally meet her daughter. India worked hard to provide for her family. She'd built a stable life in her Coleraine Township apartment on Hidden Meadows Drive, creating a safe space where her son could thrive and where she'd planned to bring home her newborn. Her mother, Terry, described her as someone who never gave up on the people she loved, someone who believed in second chances and saw the good in everyone. But India's trusting nature, her willingness to see the best in people, may have been precisely what made her vulnerable to the man who would ultimately orchestrate her death. Kayvon Warren entered India's life like many abusive partners do, charming, attentive, and seemingly devoted. At 30 years old, Warren presented himself as someone ready for commitment, someone who wanted to build a future with India and be a father to their child. But behind closed doors, a different dynamic was taking shape. Warren had been pressuring India to terminate the pregnancy from the beginning. When she refused, choosing instead to prepare for motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else in her life, Warren's mask began to slip. The controlling behaviors started small, questioning where she went, who she talked to, monitoring her phone. Then came the more direct pressure about the pregnancy, the arguments that lasted deep into the night, the subtle threats disguised as concern for their future together. What India didn't know was that Warren had already made his decision about that future, and it didn't include her or their baby surviving to see March 5th. Recent statistics reveal that homicide is a leading cause of death for pregnant women in the United States, with intimate partner violence responsible for a significant percentage of these deaths. The period around childbirth represents one of the most dangerous times for women in abusive relationships, when control is slipping away from their abuser, and when the reality of permanent connection through a child becomes undeniable. Warren wasn't just angry about the pregnancy. He was planning to eliminate the problem permanently. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that Warren didn't act alone. Investigators would later discover that he had recruited two friends, 20-year-old Robert Irvin and 22-year-old Lamar Morris Suggs, to help him carry out the murder. The level of premeditation was staggering. Warren had begun planning India's death weeks, possibly months in advance. He'd studied her routine, identified when she'd be most vulnerable, and carefully selected accomplices he believed he could trust to keep quiet. But perhaps most chilling of all was Warren's decision to request bereavement leave from his job before the crime had even been committed. Think about that for a moment. Warren was so confident in his plan, so certain that India would be dead, that he preemptively arranged time off work to mourn her death. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a moment of rage that spiraled out of control. This was a methodical execution plan, complete with alibis, cover stories, and contingency plans. Warren had decided that the easiest way to escape fatherhood was to eliminate the mother of his child entirely, and he convinced two other young men to help him do it. The conspiracy was set in motion. India, busy preparing for the most joyful day of her life, had no idea that three men were actively plotting her death. March 4th, 2023 dawned like any other day in Coleraine Township. India woke up knowing that this was the day she'd been waiting for. Her scheduled induction was just hours away. She'd packed her hospital bag days earlier, double-checking that she had everything she needed for the birth and the first few days with her newborn. Her son was staying with family, giving India time to rest before the big day. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, ready for their return home as a family of three. Around 5 a.m., as India was likely making her final preparations or catching a few more minutes of sleep before heading to the hospital, three figures approached her apartment building. Warren had provided them with everything they needed: the layout of the building, India's apartment number, the best time to strike when she'd be alone and vulnerable. What happened next lasted only minutes, but it shattered multiple families forever. The attack was swift and brutal. India, 8 months pregnant and hours away from giving birth, was shot multiple times in her own home. The baby she'd waited so long to meet died with her, never taking a single breath outside the womb. But Warren and his accomplices had overlooked one crucial detail in their planning. India's young son, who was supposed to be staying elsewhere, had returned to the apartment, and he witnessed everything. At 5:17 a.m., that same brave little boy picked up the phone and made the call that would eventually bring his mother's killers to justice. When Coleraine Township officers arrived at the Hidden Meadows Drive apartment complex, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. India lay dead in her home, surrounded by the baby items she'd so carefully chosen, her hospital bag waiting by the door like a monument to dreams that would never be fulfilled. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a random break-in gone wrong. The scene had been staged to look like a burglary, with items scattered and moved around to suggest someone had been looking for valuables. But experienced detectives know that staged crime scenes often tell a different story than they're meant to. And when they began examining India's personal relationships, one name kept surfacing: Kayvon Warren, the father of her unborn child. Warren's behavior in the immediate aftermath of India's death raised red flags. While her family grieved and friends rallied to support them, Warren seemed surprisingly composed, almost relieved. His social media post about the tragic loss felt performative, lacking the genuine anguish you'd expect from someone who'd lost both his girlfriend and his unborn child. But it was the digital evidence that ultimately unraveled Warren's carefully constructed plan. Cell phone records, GPS data, and financial transactions painted a clear picture of conspiracy and premeditation. Text messages between Warren and his co-conspirators revealed the depth of their planning and their callous disregard for India's life. Most damning of all was Warren's request for bereavement leave, submitted to his employer before India was even dead. For nearly 2 years, India's family lived with the devastating knowledge that her killers were walking free. Her mother, Terry, visited her grave regularly, promising her daughter that she would never stop fighting for justice. "I never gave up," Terry would later tell reporters. The pain of losing both her daughter and granddaughter was compounded by the frustration of watching the case move slowly through the legal system. But investigators never stopped building their case. They meticulously traced phone records, analyzed financial transactions, and interviewed witnesses. They built an airtight case that would eventually lead to the arrests of all three men involved in India's murder. In August 2025, nearly 2.5 years after India's death, Robert Irvin, Kayvon Warren, and Lamar Morris Suggs were finally arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder each, one for India and one for her unborn daughter. The arrest brought some measure of relief to India's family, but they also reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Terry Kinnemore could finally return to her daughter's grave with news she'd been waiting years to share. The people that did this to her, they have been caught and justice will be served. India Kinnemore's story represents a tragic pattern that plays out far too often across the country. When intimate partners attempt to control reproductive choices through threats, manipulation, or violence, it often escalates to deadly consequences. The warning signs were there: the pressure to terminate the pregnancy, the controlling behavior, the attempts to isolate and manipulate. But like many victims of intimate partner violence, India may have hoped that Warren would change, that the arrival of their child would transform him into the partner and father she wanted him to be. Her story reminds us that reproductive coercion is a serious form of abuse, and that the period around childbirth can be particularly dangerous for women in abusive relationships. When someone tries to control whether, when, or how someone becomes pregnant or stays pregnant, it's not love, it's control. And control, taken to its extreme, can become deadly. If you or someone you know is experiencing intimate partner violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7. India Kinnemore deserved to hold her daughter, to see her son become a big brother, to build the family she dreamed of. While justice may finally be coming for her killers, no verdict can bring back the life and love that were stolen that March morning. Remember India. Remember her dreams. And remember that recognizing the warning signs could save the next woman who finds herself in danger.